whipped on the steps of her own father's saloon. A cowboy bought the saloon and gave her the key. The morning I rode into Creed, I wasn't looking for anything. That's the truth of it. A man stops looking after enough years and enough miles, and I had plenty of both. My horse had thrown a shoe 2 days out, and we'd come in slow, him limping a little on hardpan, me not much better. 44 years old and carrying them all in my hips and my right shoulder and the place behind my left eye that flares up when it's about to rain. I wanted a livery, a meal, and one night under a roof before I pushed on to wherever I was pushing on to. That was the whole of my ambition. What I got instead was the sound of a whip. It came sharp off the adobe, that crack, before I even cleared the main street. Creed wasn't much. A dozen buildings along a rutted track with the mountain sitting up behind it like it was watching the whole show. The saloon was the biggest thing on the street, 2-story raw pine gone gray, a sign that read DOYLES in uneven letters. And on the front steps, in the full morning light so every soul in town could see it plain, a man had a woman bent half forward by a fistful of her hair and was laying a leather strap across her back. I pulled up. My horse stopped without me asking. The man doing it was maybe 55, gone thick in the gut, red in the face from effort or drink or both. Well-dressed for Creed. He had the look of a man accustomed to being agreed with. The woman was maybe 25, dark hair, wearing a calico dress that was tearing at the shoulder where he had hold of her. She wasn't crying out. That was the first thing I noticed past the crack of the strap. She wasn't making a sound. Her jaw was locked and her eyes were fixed on some middle distance like she'd gone somewhere inside herself where he couldn't reach. There were people watching. A man outside the feed store with a broom handle in his hands, not sweeping. 2 women across the street in aprons. A boy on a fence post. Watching all of them the way you watch something you've decided isn't your business. I tied off at the rail. I'd like to say I walked over slow and calm and it was all reasoned out. It wasn't. I was down and across the step before I'd thought much about it, and I had his wrist, the one with the strap, in both my hands, and I put enough into the turn that he let go of her hair and stumbled sideways into the post. He wasn't hurt. I hadn't meant to hurt him. I just meant for it to stop. He looked at me the way men like that look at interference, like something small had inconvenienced something large. "That's my daughter," he said. "I can see that." She refused an arrangement I made. This is a private matter. It stopped being private when you did it in the street. He looked me over. Dirty trail clothes, a horse with a thrown shoe. No tin, no backup, no particular air of consequence. He'd done this arithmetic before and I could see him running it again. "Ride on," he said. He reached for the strap where it had fallen. I put my boot on it. His face changed. Not fear, men like that don't scare fast, but something adjusting, recalibrating. He looked at the people watching. They were still watching. He looked back at me. "You have no standing here, friend." "I'm not your friend," I said, "and I'm not riding on." What happened next is a thing I've thought about a fair number of times since, usually late, usually with a drink. He didn't push it further. I don't know why exactly. Maybe it was the lack of yield in me. I wasn't angry, wasn't puffed up about it, just wasn't moving. Sometimes that's harder to deal with than a man who's hot. He picked up his hat from where it had come off in the stumble, set it on his head, and went inside without another word. The door swung shut behind him. I turned around. She was standing straight now, her hand pressed flat to the torn shoulder of her dress, holding it together. There was a red mark crossing from her neck down behind her collar, and her lip was cut, I saw, from being jerked by the hair. But she was looking at me with the most level eyes I think I'd ever seen on a person that age. Not grateful, not scared, not angry at me either. Just measuring. "He'll come back out with Deacons," she said. Her voice was even. "Deacons runs cards for him, big man, he's done this before." "Done what before?" "Made men who interfere regret it." I nodded. "I'll be at the livery." I started for my horse. "That's it," she said. I stopped, looked back at her. "I had a shoe thrown 2 days out," I said. "My horse needs tending before anything else." I don't know what I expected from that. Nothing, probably. I wasn't grandstanding. It was just the truth. Hector had been limping on that foot since the flats, and a man who won't see to his horse first isn't worth much anyway. She didn't say anything else. I untied Hector and walked him down to the livery. The livery man's name was Birch. Short, bald, smelled like every horse he'd ever been near, which was a lot. He looked at Hector's foot and shook his head the way men who like their craft do when they see a job that needed doing sooner. 2 days like this. We came slow. I can see that. He ran his thumb around the shoe. I'll have him right by evening. I thanked him and paid half a head and asked where I could get a meal. He pointed me up the street toward a place called Marta's, which was just a house with a sign, and told me the saloon served food, but I might want to wait on that today, which was the most Birch said to me in the whole of my time in Creed. He wasn't a man for extra words. I took his meaning. At Marta's, I got beans and salt pork and coffee that had been on since morning and sat in the corner by the window and ate. The woman I'd stopped seeing about was alone on the front porch of the saloon across the way. She was sitting on the top step, the step she'd been forced down onto, and she was stitching the torn shoulder of her dress with a needle and thread, and she was doing it with a steadiness that I found myself watching longer than I should have. A man came out the saloon door behind her, big, as she'd said. He looked at her and then he looked up the street slow until he found me in the window, just looked, then he went back inside. That was Deacon's. I finished eating and went to find the only hotel in Creed, which had 4 rooms and one of them had a broken window stuffed with rags and another smelled like something had died in the wall, but the third was all right. I took it for a night. Lay down on the bed in my trail, clothes with my boots still on, and looked at the ceiling. I'd been doing this a long time, the moving, the one-night hotels, the meals at other people's tables. I'd had a place once, a small ranch up in Colorado, dry land, more work than reward, but mine. I'd had a woman there too for a few years before she got sick with something the doctor in a Lamosa couldn't name and then couldn't stop. That was 11 years ago. Since then, I'd been mostly cattle work, some guiding, one winter scouting for the army, which I wouldn't do again, and a general slow drift from one place to the next without much reason for any particular direction. 44 years old, nothing I was pushing toward, nothing waiting behind me. I went asleep before dark. In the morning, Birch had Hector shod and fed, and the horse looked at me with the particular patience of an animal that has been well treated and knows it. I paid the balance, saddled up, and walked him out to the street. I sat there a minute. The saloon was closed still. It wasn't yet 8, but the door was open, and the woman was sweeping the boardwalk out front with a long-handled broom. She'd changed her dress. She moved careful, like the marks on her back were talking to her. I had no reason to stay, I knew that. I had no stake in Creed, no job, no errand, no kin. A man with judgment rides on. I rode to the end of the street, sat there another minute. Then I turned Hector around and rode back and tied him at the same rail as before. She looked up when I came up the walk. Stopped sweeping. You're still here, she said. Appears so. I'll buy you a coffee if there's somewhere to get it that isn't your father's place. She looked at me for a moment, then she said, Marta's, and she leaned the broom against the wall and walked. I caught up and we went without talking, which suited both of us, I think. Her name was Cora Doyle. Her mother had died when she was 9, and she'd been running the saloon for her father since she was old enough to be useful, and she'd done it without wages because that wasn't the arrangement, wasn't ever the arrangement being that this was her father's place and she lived in it. The man her father had made the arrangement with, the one she'd refused, was a mining claim broker from Denver named Sutter, who was 40 years older than she was, and who had, she said, without inflection, a reputation in Denver that had preceded him to Creed by a month. Meaning she'd found out what she was being sold into before she said no. She told me this over coffee at Marta's like she was reporting it. No tears, no appeal, just the facts laid out flat so I had them. I asked her what she wanted to do about it. She looked at me across the table like nobody had asked her that before, and maybe nobody had. Leave, she said. I've wanted to leave since I was about 16. What's kept you? He'd have no one to run it. He drinks before noon now. The books are mine, the ordering is mine, the staff is mine. If I leave, it falls apart. Then let it fall apart. She shook her head, not dismissing the idea, more like it cost something to say the next part. It's got my mother's name in the deed, her maiden name. Doyle was her name before it was his. She built it with him. If I leave and it falls apart, that goes too. I understood that. Some things you can't just walk away from, even when walking away is the right call. How much does he owe? I said. She blinked. What? A man who drinks before noon and doesn't run his own books, he's in debt somewhere. She was quiet, then, the bank in a Lamosa, and Gruber who runs the dry goods. And 3 months of back wages to 2 of the girls who work the floor. How much total? She told me. I sat with that number. It wasn't a small number. It was most of what I had, which wasn't much by most measures, but was all of what 11 years of cattle work and careful living had put together. I'd been carrying it in a bank draft in my vest pocket since I left a Lamosa, didn't quite know what I was carrying it toward, just knew I was done working other people's ranches for the rest of my days. It was supposed to be the start of something of my own, a piece of land somewhere, a place to finally stop moving. I sat with the number and I thought about Cora's face when she said her mother's name was in the deed. I'll think on it, I said. I paid for the coffee and walked out. I will not pretend I worked it out cleanly. I spent that day walking Creed, which didn't take long, and I went to the bank, which was 1 room and a man named Cole who wore his suspenders too tight. And I asked him questions about the saloon debt in the careful way that doesn't commit you to anything. And he answered them in the careful way that doesn't reveal anything, which meant by the end of it we had said nothing official and both of us knew everything. I went to Gruber at the dry goods and had a shorter version of the same conversation. By afternoon, I knew what the number was down to the dollar. I also went to find Deakins. Not to fight him, I want to be clear on that. I'm not a young man, and I've been in enough situations to know the difference between what settles things and what just stirs them up. I found him at a card table near the back of the saloon. The saloon was open by then, noon, Doyle behind the bar looking like he'd already had his first. And I sat down across from Deakins without being invited, and I said it plain. I'm looking at buying the saloon. He looked at me with the flat eyes of a man who spent his whole life at the table. Mr. Doyle isn't selling. He's in debt to 3 parties by an amount he can't clear. He's selling whether he knows it yet or not. I'm asking you before I go further because you're a practical man and I want this to go easy, and that starts with you. He looked at me for a long time. The kind of looking that sizes up whether you're serious or stupid. I let him look. I work for wages, he said finally. I know, I'll honor them through the end of the month. After that, it depends on whether you're useful. He picked up his cards. Have your conversation with Doyle, he said. Not agreement, not refusal, just the door left open. I went and had my conversation with Doyle. That is the thing I'll say the least about because it was the ugliest part of what happened in Creed, and I don't carry it with much pride. Doyle raged. He threatened. He told me twice that Cora was his, and the saloon was his, and no drifter with a throne-shoe horse had any claim on either. He was a man who'd spent 25 years being the biggest thing in a small place, and here was someone coming in and not flinching, and it broke something in him that I think was already cracked. I sat in the chair across his desk and let the rage run its course, and when it was done I put the draft on the table and went through the numbers, what he owed, what I was paying, what would be left for him, and I let him sit with it. He said no. I got up and left. He had me found at the hotel that night. Deakins knocked, not rough, just knocked. He stood in the doorway and said, he'll take it. That was all. I said 9 o'clock at Cole's. Deakins nodded and went. Cora didn't know. I should say that plain. I had not talked to her since the morning. I'd seen her once at midday from across the street when she was carrying linens in from the line, and she'd looked up and seen me, and we'd acknowledged each other the way people do when they're not sure what they are to each other yet. I had not told her what I was planning because I wasn't sure until I did it. The signing at Cole's took an hour. Doyle signed like a man being made to swallow something wrong. Cole notarized it with the practiced blankness of a man who sees more than he says. I walked out with a deed that had the name Doyle on it, and below that my name, Calhoun, Marsh Calhoun, first time I'd written it in any kind of official capacity in some years, and it looked strange and solid on the page. I stood outside Cole's for a moment in the cold morning. Then I went to find Cora. She was in the kitchen behind the saloon, which she'd been up since 5 doing. I could tell by the smell of bread and the flour on her forearms. She looked at me when I came through the back door and read something in my face before I said a word. What did you do? She said, not a question exactly. I put the deed on the table. She looked at it, she didn't pick it up right away. She just looked at it, and I watched the understanding move through her face, slow, like it needed time to be real. You bought it, she said. I bought it. With what? What I had. She looked up. Her eyes were doing something complicated that I didn't have a name for. Why? This is the part I'd thought about the least, which probably means it was the truest part. Your mother's name is in that deed, I said, and you've run this place for 9 years without wages. Seemed to me you'd earned it. She stood there. The bread behind her was about to need tending, and she didn't move. I don't know what this means, she said. Her voice had come down from the careful, even place she usually kept it. If this is something you expect. I don't expect anything, I said. I've got a horse that's shod now in no particular direction. You need someone who can stand between you and anyone who tries what your father tried. I'll do that. What you do with the place after is yours. She looked at me for a long time. You spent everything, she said. I had it to spend. You don't know me. I know enough. She turned and pulled the bread out of the oven. It needed another minute, but she pulled it anyway, set it on the rack, stood with her back to me for a moment. Then she turned around and she picked up the deed, and she looked at her mother's name on it, Doyle, Margaret Doyle, and below that the new name, and she folded it carefully and held it against her chest. I'll hire you on, she said, fairly wages. That's not necessary. It is to me, she said. I'm not a charity and this isn't a debt, it's a job. You stand between me and whatever needs standing between, and you eat here and sleep in the tack room out back, and I'll pay you what the work is worth. I thought about that. The tack room. It's warmer than it sounds, she said. I said, all right. What the next 6 months were was not a story I can tell quickly because it wasn't a quick thing. It was work mostly. Hard, daily, unglamorous work, fixing what Doyle had let go sideways, the leaking roof in the back room, the broken step second from the top, the books that needed untangling from 3 years of his particular way of keeping them, which was to say badly. Deacons stayed on. He was useful, more useful than I'd let myself expect. Ran the card tables clean, kept order without being brutish about it, knew every man in town by name and reputation. We didn't become friends exactly, but we became something, the kind of working understanding between men that doesn't need much words. Cora ran the place the way she'd always run it, just without anyone above her. The difference was visible, not in any big way, just in the set of her shoulders when she walked through the room, in the way she spoke to the 2 girls who worked the floor, in the speed at which the back wages got paid. She had the books cleared with the dry goods man in 3 months. The Alamosa Bank took longer, but she had a plan for it, and she worked it. I did what I said I'd do. There were men who came in and pushed. There are always men who see a woman running a business as an invitation. Most of them I handled with just being there, just the presence of someone who wasn't going to move. A few needed more than that. I won't account for each one. Nobody got killed. Doyle left Creed. I don't know where he went. He sold his horse and most of what he had left and got on a stage east, and that was the last anyone saw of him. Cora didn't talk about it. I didn't push. What happened between she and I happened the way things happen when 2 people are working in close quarters, and they're both trying to be careful, and eventually, the carefulness gets worn down by just the plain dailiness of sharing meals and solving problems, and standing next to each other in the cold when something needs doing at 2 in the morning. It wasn't a dramatic thing. It was a Tuesday in November when it rained all day, and we were going through the winter supply list together at the kitchen table, and her hand came to rest on mine. Just rested there, not urgent, just put down like she meant to put it down, and I turned mine over and held it. That was all. That was the beginning. Sutter came back in the spring, the Denver man. He came with 2 associates and a new suit and the air of a man who considers setbacks temporary. He sat down at a table and ordered whiskey and asked to speak with the owner. Cora came out from the back. He smiled at her like nothing had happened. Like the arrangement and the strap on the steps and the winter between then and now were just weather, past and forgotten. He said he'd heard the place was under new management, and he had a proposal that would benefit all parties. Cora looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at me where I was standing at the bar. I didn't move. I didn't need to. I just stood there and let him look at me looking at him. She turned back to Sutter. Get out of my saloon, she said. Not loud, not angry. Just the way you say something that requires no further discussion. He looked at his associates. He looked at me. He looked at Deacons near the door. He put some bills on the table for the whiskey, more than it cost, a last small gesture of superiority, and he went. Cora watched him go through the window. I came and stood beside her. She was quiet for a minute. Outside, the street was muddy from the snowmelt, and the sky was that particular clean blue you get in the mountains after the cold breaks. "He'll try again somewhere," she said. "Probably. Not here, though." "No," I said, "not here." She leaned into me, not much, just a few inches, her shoulder against mine, and I felt the weight of her there, the realness of it, the warmth. I put my arm around her, and she let me, and we stood there in the window and watched the street dry out in the morning sun. I'm not a man who usually has much to say about what I've done. Most of it has just been years of necessary things done as well as I could manage them, and that's the sum of it. But every once in a while I'll be going through the books at the end of an evening, or I'll be up on the roof fixing something with the whole of the valley laid out below me, or I'll come in from the cold and smell bread and hear Cora in the kitchen. Every once in a while in those moments I'll catch myself and feel it. This is mine. Not just the deed, not just the building, not just the business. The whole of it. The life in it. I spent 11 years moving because I thought what I'd had was gone and couldn't be gotten again. A place to stand. A person who chose to stand there with me, not because she had to, not because she'd been sold into it, but because she looked at me straight one day and decided I was worth the looking. The tack room, it turns out, is warmer than it sounds, though I haven't slept in it for some months now. Creed is not much, still just a dozen buildings on a rutted track with the mountain behind it. But on the door of the biggest building on the main street, the sign doesn't say Doyle's anymore. She changed it the second week after the signing, just the one word, Cora's. I put the letters up myself. Took me most of a cold morning to get them even. I think they're straight. She says they're close enough.